Well, hello, friends. It's Monty, your favorite shrimp boat captain. Today, we got an empty classroom actually right now. If you're watching this on the World Wide Web or sitting in this classroom, I'm out at Mill Creek stacking skulls with the wrestling team for the sectional tournament. What you've got for yourselves today are those terms. All right, those terms. Largely what it is 1920s economics, and we'll end up right there with the Great Depression. So, as seen before, this thing right here, whoop, swivel. Yeah. So, let's hit this stuff up here. All right. We take a look. Starting off with our standards. Oh, by the way, this right here, it's already on ITSL. It's waiting for you, so go check it out. Largely today, we're looking at causes of the Great Depression. Let's see, does it get better? A little bit better on this side. We're going to hit causes of the Great Depression. And a little bit we'll get into this, Hoover's administrative responses. But not a tremendous amount because, well, there wasn't much of a response. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and get that election of 1928 taken care of. All right. So, we see here we've got this election of 1928. This election really is wide open. All right. It's wide open because Calvin Coolidge, if you remember, he's sick as a dog, and he is not going to be running again in 28. For the Republicans, they're going to go with Herbert Hoover. That's their front runner. We've seen Hoover. Remember all the Hooverizing from World War I? Yep, that's him. He has actually served under both Harding and Coolidge, and he gets nominated easily, paired up with a guy, Charles Curtis, out of Kansas. All right. Platform for Big Herb and the Republicans, they're going to focus on the prosperity that they have been experiencing. They favor a high tariff. They promise that they're going to enforce prohibition. And they're still saying they're against the League. Democrats, if we remember back in the last election, the Democrats kind of had that split between rural and urban, and it created an absolute issue. That's all been healed up, but they still have the 2/3 rule. They're going to go with their boy right here, Al Smith. Al Smith's the governor of New York. They're going to pair him up with the Senate Majority Leader, a guy named Robinson. Their platform, a little bit of a change of position in regards to the tariff. They want a high tariff. They want public works programs, all that infrastructure stuff. And they say that they will make an honest effort for prohibition. In this election, largely the issues, prohibition is one. Hoover here, he's dry. Smith is wet. And then you've got religious issues. Hoover is a Protestant. He fits our WASP norm. Smith is a Catholic, and it just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. And really what we will see all the way through is when a Catholic is running for office, you're going to get a lot of propaganda saying, oh, well, if you elect this guy, he's going to turn the White House over to the Pope. All right? Now, is that going to happen? Probably not. However, we see that as what the propaganda machine is pushing out. Likewise, whenever a Jew runs for public office, everyone says, oh, the Jew's going to be resting on the Sabbath, and that's the day that we'll get attacked. A lot of nonsense, but the propaganda machine works. All right. In the campaign, Smith here is going to be colorful. He'll be real witty. Hoover, he's just as dull as he can be. All right. He really is dull. Democrats are going to spend $5.3 million. Republicans spend $6 million. And it's a whole lot of money to get blown out like that. Yeah, that's no bueno. Okay. So Hoover's in, and largely when we look at Hoover, he's a continuation of a lot of the same stuff we saw coming out of Harding and Coolidge, and really what these guys are going to ride is that high economic success. Okay. Granted, there was that little mini depression after World War I with the inflation rates being high, and things happened, and then they were actually pretty significant, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later on. But good times are rolling, and people believe that the good times are always going to roll. All right. A couple things we need to take a look at here. Number one, review the Federal Reserve. Remember, we already talked Federal Reserve created back in 1913. Federal Reserve at this point is regulating American banks. Okay, they are the institution that's regulating American banks. At this point, there's about 700 banks under the Federal Reserve's directive. All right. Now, if you are a member bank of the Federal Reserve, whoa, it just got bright, didn't it? Goodness. What was I saying? Oh, yeah, member banks. Member banks could borrow money from the Federal Reserve here. The interest rate at which a member bank would borrow is what's known as the rediscount rate. Okay, that's your rediscount rate. Now, what we're going to see is in November of 1919, remember, that's when all the strikes, all the inflation, all the, what we called in class, that market correction, that post-war market correction. What we're going to see coming out of the Fed is November 1919, the Federal Reserve actually raised the rediscount rate. Okay? And they raised that from November 1919 to May of 1920. In November of 1920, they lowered the rediscount rate, made it easier for people to borrow, and suddenly it kind of helped in the recovery. Now, what we're going to see here is because people don't understand economics, because people are stupid. Yeah, that's right. People begin to believe that high rediscount rates are the cause of the depression, and that easy money equates to economic prosperity. All right. Now, as we start to roll out of the 1920s and going on, people are making a lot of money. Remember, people are making money. They have leisure time, and good times are rolling. Okay. Good times are rolling. What we're going to see as an effect is a culture of consumerism is really going to take over. All right. This culture of consumerism takes over. Really, in the 1920s, what we were seeing was per capita income had increased by about 30%, and with more leisure time, more money, 30% more money, America went on a shopping spree. Okay, going into the 1920s, largely America went on a shopping spree in regards to things they were buying. Let's see, you've got electricity. Kind of give you an idea of electricity. In 1912, only about 16% of homes had electricity. By 1924, over 2/3 of all homes nationwide had electricity. You say, well, where's the other third? I'm glad you asked. Come with me. Right here. This is where they don't have electricity. Yep, we call that Appalachia. And why? Because we're a bunch of hicks, and what do we need power for? We got banjos. Yep, I just did that. Other things. Manufacturing. All right, manufacturing expands. 1904, manufacturing was about a $6 billion year in industry. By 1926, it's an $18 billion year industry. How much money are we spending, you might ask? I'm glad you asked. 1922, Americans were spending $56.2 billion with a B dollars. By the end of the decade, we're spending about $74.3 billion. We see lots of new products, lots of new industries starting to boom. Oil, rubber, glass. Why? The automobile. Yep, thanks, Ford. And advertising. Advertising grew tremendously. It really grew in the 1920s. World War I, advertising was about a $400 million a year industry. By 1924, businesses are spending $1.5 billion a year on advertising. And we can see other things that people are buying. There's your Montgomery Ward receiver right there. So we can see that. Think about having that bad boy. That's going to make you cool. That right there makes you cool. What else? Yeah, well, we talked just the other day with that DBQ of the week. Who was it? Jane Addams, Susan B. Somebody saying something about appliances and how they're making life easy. Yeah, if you've ever had to sweep a rug, you can appreciate a vacuum cleaner. And if you've never swept a rug, yeah, one day you're going to have to. And you're going to remember this lecture. So, a lot of people believe that this good time was going to roll forever. We tend to actually see that. Every time we skip one of these economic depression cycles, people begin to live and spend as if good times are always going to roll. All right? And that's never the case because we know it's a cycle. All right? We're going to see people jumping into this get-rich-quick speculative phenomenon just really exploding. And it gets all kinds of convoluted. Religion and advertising actually get mixed. There's a guy named Bruce Barton who wrote a book in 1924 called The Man Nobody Knows. He said business was moral. He compared selling to praying. He said God wanted us to enjoy ourselves, and he said that Jesus was a great businessman, and you should be like Jesus. Hey, I'm over here. Come this way. Thank you. Thanks, Swivel. Now, this would be a bestseller. People are buying this stuff, and here we are shaping a reality of consumerism. One of the more dangerous things that we're going to see here in the 1920s is credit purchasing. Okay, credit purchasing right there. Credit purchasing basically means buying on credit. Yes, like credit cards. In the early 1920s, it wasn't acceptable. People were a little bit more financially responsible. They said, hey, I'm not going to buy something that I know I can't afford. Well, as the good times continue to roll, this norm is going to change and credit purchasing is going to increase rapidly. By 1927, about 15% of all goods were purchased on credit. 85% of all furniture was bought on credit, and 50% of all your appliances bought on credit. By 1929, by the end of the decade, cumulatively, this country had put itself in about $7 billion worth of credit debt. Why? Because they think the good times are always going to roll. And so they can buy things that they necessarily can't afford because they're always going to have a job. They're always going to have more money. They're always got free time. All right? Now, hindsight lets us know they're wrong. But you can't tell people in the past anything. And if you could, you probably wouldn't exist. So, let's talk about that get-rich-quick scheme. All right? Lots of different ways to get rich quick. One, this guy, Charles Ponzi. Okay? You guys ever heard of a Ponzi scheme? Yeah. A lot of times you'll hear about a Ponzi scheme. Oh, it's too good to be true. Yeah, it's typically a Ponzi scheme. Ponzi, right there. He was a former veggie salesman. We learned from, who are Italian guys? Mario and Luigi, but that's not their name. Sacco and Vanzetti. Yeah, you can't. Oh, that was a fish salesman. Never mind. But still, you can't trust anybody who sells you food. Ponzi, he was a former veggie salesman. He was a forger. He was a smuggler. He is going to use this this speculative era, this get-rich-quick consumerism time period to, well, get rich quick. Ponzi started off, he was a clerk at a foreign exchange company. All right. A foreign exchange house, I should say. I recognize that you guys probably don't understand what a foreign exchange company does, so I'll tell you. Largely, they speculate on currency. All right. Now, in the U.S., it's not really one of these things that is a good, well, maybe not a good investment, but something that we see a lot because today the dollar is so strong. Come over here. I'll put that in my pocket. There we go. It's not really something that is something big and it's strong. However, you go around the world, you see a lot of people trying to speculate on currency. For example, when I was in Costa Rica, my mainest of all main mans, Justo Luis. What's up, Justo? Probably not ever going to watch this, but much love. Lydiette, I'm going to come back and I want some empanadas. Te amo. But anyway, Justo, he did a little bit of speculating on currency. He knew that I got paid in U.S. currency, and I would exchange U.S. currency for Costa Rican colones. Now, if I ran out of money, colones that is, Justo would always say, hey, Josh, you come to me, Justo Luis. He would do that. I loved it. Justo Luis. And change money with me. Cool. All right. And what he would do is he would look at the currency rates and he'd basically give me about a 500 colone to the dollar transaction. Now, what he did is he held that U.S. currency, and I'd typically trade out $100 at a time, and he would hold that $100 bill, and he'd wait for the exchange rate, instead of being 500 to the dollar, he'd wait till it was like 550, 575 to the dollar. Okay? Then he would go to the bank and exchange that for colones, thus profiting 75 colones, maybe 100 colones on the dollar, which, not bad. You know, Justo was the man. Now, Ponzi here was one of those clerks in one of these companies. In 1920, he is going to establish his own company, the Old Colony Foreign Exchange Company, and start running ads in Boston. Okay, he ran ads in Boston that said if you invest $10 now, in 90 days I'll give you 15. Now, his whole game plan, he's going to play the currency game against itself. What he told people he was doing was purchasing international postal union money orders in foreign currency and then taking advantage of exchange rates. All right. Now, by June and July, Ponzi was taking in over $1 million a week. People have a lot of money. You tell them they can get rich quick, they're going to jump on Ponzi's scheme. All right. Local DA started investigating Ponzi and the Old Colony Foreign Exchange Company, and really found that in 1919, remember he's taking in $1 million a week, but found in 1919 he had purchased just over $60,000 worth of bonds. All right. Now, Ponzi's in trouble because, numbers don't lie and they're not adding up right. The DA basically kind of figured out that they're saying, all right, yeah, you bring in your $10 and in 90 days, I'll give you $15. Well, on the 89th day, those kids from over there come in and say, hey, here's $10. You come in. It's all money. It's all liquid and it's all going away. Mind you, money's going in the pocket. All right. Now, Ponzi should probably pack up shop and bolt, but instead he's going to become even more bold, and he promises a 50% increase in 45 days. So, same deal, half the time. All right. At that point, his office is going to get flooded a little over $300,000 a day. Courts have to come in and close this thing down. August 1920, they come in and close this thing down, found that he had a total valuation in regards of assets of $0. If he were to pay everybody out, he'd be in debt $2 million. Ponzi would be tried and found guilty for mail fraud and grand larceny and spend a couple years in jail. Monty, why are we talking about this? Because it's a get-rich-quick world. And lots of things get that name Ponzi scheme because of that dude. All right? Now, scheming in some type of weird market system like Ponzi wasn't the only way that people were scheming. Speculation has long been an American pastime, especially with land. Okay, railroads and cars were making Florida accessible for the very, very first time. All right, lots of people started moving to Florida, and the population really boomed. Kind of give you an idea. Just in 1920 alone, the population of Miami grew from 300,000 to 30,000 to 130,000 people 1 year. 1 year, 100,000 people moved to Miami. Why? Well, it's simple. Because there were ads in newspapers like this saying, hey, come to Miami. Where else are you going to be able to play golf off the back of an elephant? All right. Sounds like, well, I would say redneck good times, but I've never seen an elephant in Dawsonville. Oh, or does the zoo have it? Or do they got tigers? I don't know. Maybe I should go back and check it out. Maybe they'll let me. That dude's weird. Yeah. Now, 1925, this Florida land boom is going to continue. 1925, there are more lots for sale than families in the U.S. All right. Subdivisions were being built and not finished. I mean, there quite literally were more lots for sale than there were families in the whole country. A lot of people, they see that picture. You can play golf off the back of an elephant, and they say, oh, man, look at this. It says waterfront property. I want waterfront property. And so they are buying this land sight unseen. When they finally do go to Florida, guess where that waterfront property is? The swamp. Yeah, they just bought swampland. It's not what they thought. But this is what's happening. Okay? 1926, everything in the Florida land boom is going to go wrong. The buyers decreased. Builders couldn't meet deadlines. Investors pulled out. IRS got involved. And then in September of 1926, really the nail in the hammer was a hurricane hit South Florida, sustained winds of over 125 miles an hour. Yep, your beachfront bungalow in the swamp, it doesn't exist anymore. So, while we've got Ponzi schemes, we've got land speculation, probably the most popular form of speculation was in the Great Bull Market. Okay? The Great Bull Market. Now, stock market. Stock market began to climb in the 1920s, and public participation grew with the market. All right. Now, what we're looking at is there are two different types of markets. You have bull markets and you have bear markets. A bull market, for economists, a bull market is a 20% increase from the low. All right. So if you hit a low and it goes up 20%, boom, you're in a bull market and times are groovy. Now, the 1920s stock market in its totality is what's known as the Great Bull Market. If we take a look here, there we go. All right. So let's say from this low right here just before 1922 to just after 1920, that's definitely a 20% increase. All right. That's definitely a 20% increase. That's a bull market. But if we span out and we look at the entirety of the 20s, that's way more than a 20% increase. All right. Hence why the 1920s market is called the Great Bull Market. You're right. The volumes of shares began to rise, and then eventually the market just totally left reality. Kind of give you an idea, in 1922, there were 260.7 million shares being traded on the market. By 1924, 282 million shares. 1925, 452.2 million shares. 1927, 576.9 million shares. And then by the end of the decade, 1929, you've got basically 1.125 billion shares being traded in the market. Holy cow, man, that's nuts. That's a lot of participation. Now, the thing is, when people are investing, really what a lot of people look at is where is it? The Dow Jones Industrial Average. Okay, the Dow Jones Industrial Average largely is an index of stock prices. It's an index of your industrial stocks, your transportation, your utilities. Okay. Now, in the 1920s, it was being used to indicate the economy as a whole. That's a huge mistake. That's a huge mistake. You cannot use the Dow Jones Industrial Average to determine whether or not the overall economy is doing well. It's a bad move. For this type of market, for a bull market to continue to grow, it needs more people to invest. Right? It needs more people to invest. And so what we are going to create is what are known as call loans or broker's loans. Okay? Call loans, also known as broker's loans. Now, these are loans that are specifically for investment in stocks on margin. On margin. Buying stocks on margin means you're buying them on credit. Yes. All you had to have was a certain percent of the stock, and you can buy the rest on credit. So when the good times roll and you end up making a huge profit, you pay back the broker. All right? The problem is the broker can make that call. Can say, hey, yo, Monty, it's time to pay up. Well, cool. If I buy on margin here, and the broker calls me here, I'm okay. I've made a lot of money. I can pay off my debt and everything's good. However, if I buy here and the broker calls me here, I'm in trouble. All right? I'm in trouble. I'm losing my home. I'm losing my car. I'm losing my appliances. I'm losing everything that I've been spending so much money on, thinking good times are always going to roll. All right. The Federal Reserve is going to try to slow speculation. They'll raise rediscount rates, but it doesn't work because largely what we see is this optimist psychology is pushing the market. All right. It largely is pushing the market. And like I said, man, people are looking at this Dow Jones and saying, oh, but it keeps going up, and so the economy must be doing well. And so they're going to continue to speculate. And like I said, that's a terrible thing to look at. You have to actually look at market factors. And if we're looking at the market factors, times are not good. All right? Times are not good. If we think, every panic or depression is typically caused by bad farming, bad banking, something with Europe, and typically a wild card. Okay? A couple things are going on wrong. We to start off with, income. Income was wildly displaced. In the 1920s, we had this maldistribution of income. The top 1/10. Okay, think about this now. The top 1/10 of the top 1%. All right. So here's the 1%. That right there, the top 1/10 of 1% had the same as the bottom 42% of families all put together. Crazy, right? Yeah, and through the 1920s, that gap would continue to increase. Wages also were not keeping up with productivity. There was not, we're not buying fast enough. Purchasing power wasn't, purchasing power, wages, nothing's keeping up with productivity. We are largely overproducing. All right, let me stop and jump to this side. Maybe it'll pop up. No, it doesn't matter. But you can see it because this is all on Itzel. Yay! Overproduction. Our industries are overproducing. What's going to cause an overproduction? Well, why are we producing so much? Yeah, because we've got, remember, all the other industries are now starting to pick up on Ford's. Yep, you know what this is. Good gracious, why can't I think? Probably because I'm teaching to a room of nobody. Hello, everybody. I'm losing my mind. The moving assembly line. Thank you. Good grief. I'm pointing to you people like you're here. Stop talking to yourself and teach. Okay. So we've got that stuff going on with industry. Also, we've got some bad banking structures. There's one of those key things. Unless you were in the Federal Reserve, your bank was not being regulated. In the 1920s, it was extremely common to see bank failures. Okay, extremely common to see bank failures. We were seeing about 500 banks nationwide fail a year. Okay, 500 a year. We've also got this trade imbalance. Okay, we've got a trade imbalance driving up debt. We are in 1914. Okay, 1914, the U.S. was a debtor nation. Okay, we were a debtor nation before getting into World War I. We owed the rest of the world cumulatively about $4 billion. After World War I, we became a creditor nation, and the rest of the world owed us $12.5 billion. Now, here's the thing that you got to understand. Creditor nations should import more than they export. Okay? Again, they should import more than they export. The U.S. didn't, thus creating this trade imbalance. And what do trade imbalances do? Drive up debt. It says it right there. Go on, Itzel. All right. The other thing that we've got going on, we've got high tariffs. All right. Remember, if we raise our tariff, what does the rest of the world do? Yep, raises their tariff. All right. And so that's going to really make it difficult to push our goods. Another big issue, a big issue that nobody's looking at is farming. Farming's in some serious trouble. The teens were a great decade for the American farmer. Why? Yep, because of the war. Remember, Europe goes to war. They're not in the fields. Or not in the farm fields. They're on the battlefield, and so they need our stuff. All right. And the U.S. largely supported the world during World War I. After World War I ended, though, that bubble burst. Okay, the bubble burst, and we went back to pre-war numbers. All right. During the war, farming was about a $10 billion a year industry. After the war is over, it dropped back down to where it was before the war at about $4 billion. All right. The problem is, and we can see it here, and we can see it if we look here, is this bubble right here is largely because of the war. We see the sales, the purchasing, the farm wages go up. But which one of these goes down first? Yeah, we see the sales going down first. All right, and the sales are going down, and it's a year or two later that what farmers are buying and how much they're paying themselves goes down, which means this is all debt years. Okay, this is all debt years, and this is going into the 20s, and so farming, this bubble here would burst, and farming continues on a trajectory that looks like that. All right, that's a tremendous amount of debt sitting right there. All right, but nobody's looking at that stuff. All right, nobody's looking at that stuff. Everybody's looking at the Dow Jones, and the good times are going to last forever. No, they're not. All right, because what happens when the bottom falls out? This happens. Okay, stock market crash. Couple things you guys have got to understand about the stock market crash. Number one, the stock market crash was not a one-day event. A lot of people go, oh, it's a one-day event. No, it's not true. There was one day that was really bad. That was called Black Tuesday, and we'll talk about it in just a second. It was not a one-day event. If we look here, it's going to go from September of 1929 to July of 32. That's why I have that date there. That is how long it's going to take for the bottom to fall out. The other big common misconception about the stock market crash is it didn't start the Depression. All right? It did not start the Depression. It did create a recession, which we'll hit shortly, but it does not start the Great Depression. So, let's hit this crash. All right? Bull market. The bull market hit its high on September 3rd, 1929 at 381. Okay, that's what we're looking at right here. All right, we hit our high right here. All right, hit the high. That was on September 3rd. It drops on the 4th. Nobody freaks out. It's seen as a market correction because if we look here, coming from 27 to 29, it's going up and down, up and down, up and down. And as long as that trajectory keeps looking like that, then everybody's fine. And these are seen as market corrections. All right. And so when we hit here on the 3rd and it drops 4 points, it's seen as a market correction. Nobody's freaking out. All right. Except for it continues to fall. All right. It continues to fall. October 23rd, $4 billion in paper is lost. October 24th by 11 a.m., $9 billion in the market was lost. Just the first couple hours. J.P. Morgan, remember the big banker guy? Yeah, J.P. Arranged a meeting where he and other savvy investors pooled somewhere between $20 and $30 million together. All right. What they did is they placed orders. They placed actually an order for 10,000 shares in U.S. Steel and placed similar symbolic orders elsewhere. If J.P. Morgan is buying into these companies, what are you going to do? Of course, you're going to buy into them too, because if the richest dude and, Richie Rich is doing something, it's like if the Oracle of Omaha is buying into something, what are you going to do? You're going to do the exact same thing because he's filthy rich and he knows what he's doing. So you think. All right? Now, this stops the sell-off, but the thing is those guys never actually bought the stock. They placed the order, never bought the stock, just trying to stop everybody selling their shares. All right? Almost 13 million shares were traded that day. The Dow was only down 6 points by the end of the day. All right? So not too far from where it started. Monday the 28th, prices were still low. There was absolutely no confidence. Rumors were circulating that Morgan was going to have another meeting. There's these rumors that bankers are committing suicide. They're jumping out their windows to their death. That stuff never actually happened. One of my favorite rumors is that Hoover was paralyzed in fear. He wasn't. He was walking around. He's fine. But the selling continues and the down was down considerably. There were lots of margin calls. All right. If you remember, margin calls are the brokers making that call to get everybody who bought on margin, meaning they bought on credit. Okay. So lots of margin calls were scheduled for the 29th. Tuesday the 29th. Black Tuesday. That's what this is. Bam. All right. Tuesday the 29th, the market's going to drop 30 points. Okay. Market drops 30 points. 16.4 million shares were traded that day. That would be a record that would last for 39 years. All right. Now, here's the thing. We take a look. Remember, Black Tuesday, it dropped 39 points. And so we see this drop off right here. It's not this whole thing. Remember, that's like basically the month of October coming down. But right about here where it just goes completely vertical. Boop, that's 39 points. The next 2 days it goes up 34 points. People are feeling good. People are feeling good. Cautiously optimistic. Let's use that. But that was the stock market crash. All right? It's this right here. This right here is the stock market crash. Now, if we take a look at it, is it really a crash? Now, we've got this huge bubble that pops. If we're continuing this trend, where it crashes and hits bottom and bounces back, that continues the same trajectory right there. All right. People should have seen this. All right. They should have seen that this was going to come. The market doesn't build this much without correcting itself, and so this largely is a huge correction. But it's a stock market crash. It actually had little effect on the average American. Only about 2.5% of Americans own stock. It was largely companies. What this will do, what this stock market crash will do, is create a recession. Okay, it creates a recession. A recession is a period of reduced economic activity where the economy is in steady decline. Typically, what we see during recessions, corporations have to lay people off because there's low purchasing power, there's high inventories, no demand, warehouses are full, you're fired. And so remember, this stuff has happened in the past. Has the president ever done anything about it? No. But what's changed about society? All right. Remember, people are now expecting the federal government to do something to help out. All right. That's all that stuff that came out of that progressive era and all our immigrants and all that other stuff. Hoover's going to take a real narrow framework in regards to what he wants to do. What he's going to call for here is voluntary cooperation. Okay, voluntary cooperation was this thought that corporations and people would work together to get themselves out of the recession. All right. Hoover did not think that it was the U.S. government's responsibility to provide relief. Voluntary cooperation was used in Europe, and it worked. All right. We can see voluntary cooperation right here. You see this line of unemployed people, and the big sign says free coffee and donuts for the unemployed. Sure, before you go out and you search for a job every single day, come get something on your belly so that you're not starving all day and have a bad interview. Voluntary cooperation. Why would this business do that? Yeah, all right. This business would do that because once these people have jobs, are they going to start being regular patrons of this shop because they help them out? That's the idea behind voluntary cooperation. All right. Now, outside of voluntary cooperation, Hoover will start calling business leaders and asking for concessions. Really what he wanted, he said, if you have to fire people, fine. But don't cut their wages. Okay, don't cut their wages. And really, the idea here is in theory, it's better to fire people to lay them off than to cut their wages, because if you do that, you sustain purchasing power. For example, if I'm getting paid $10 a day, we'll just say $10 a day, and that's how much I've always been paid, and everything's all good and fine and dandy. As long as I still make $10, I'm still going to spend money. But if you cut me from $10 to $5, am I going to go out and spend money? No. All right. And so that's the idea. He's really going to focus on manufacturing, banking, transportation, utilities in this idea. He'll send telegrams to mayors and governors telling them to continue public works programs. But he's not going to take a super active role because he believes it's not his job. This is a cyclical thing, and it will fix itself. U.S. thought it was in a short-term decline. A lot of experts thought that by May or June of 1930, things would be back to normal, and they might have been right. Right? They might have been right. But we're in this recession, and Congress passes the Smoot-Hawley tariff. Okay? The Smoot-Hawley tariff. Smoot-Hawley tariff is going to raise the tariff to the highest at the time. The thought was that we needed to protect agriculture. The problem, or it was a problem because of overproduction. If we jack our tariff up on agriculture to protect U.S. agriculture, the rest of the world's going to jack up tariffs on manufactured goods. If we look at all our warehouses for all of our industries, they're slammed full. We don't need a high tariff. We need to figure out a way to export what's in our warehouses out to the rest of the world. With this Smoot-Hawley tariff, that's not going to happen. All right? And so really what we see is this recession and the Smoot-Hawley tariff combined is what's going to send us into the Great Depression. All right? Now, if we're taking a look at this, here's that economic downturn in 1920, right after the war, that market correction. Okay? Now, there it is. It is much sharper, it is much steeper than what we see from the Great Depression. The reason why this is the Great Depression and not this is this takes us below pre-war numbers. All right? So, by late 1930, like I said, this decline, the recession plus the Smoot-Hawley tariff is going to give us the Great Depression. Businesses are going to crash. Layoffs and wage cuts were common in 1931, and we don't know how to respond. All right, we don't know how to respond. How will we respond? We'll pick that up on Monday. Hopefully, you guys were able to get everything you needed right here. If not, you can always go back and watch. Make sure you comment. Make sure you like. Make sure you subscribe. Make me a YouTube sensation.